Hey, everybody, and welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. Today is day 115 on your calendar. That puts you at April 23rd. And so we are right smack in the middle of King David. If you have never been with me before, this is your first time. I'd love if you stayed and listened to what happens today, but you don't have any foundation. And so I'd love if you went all the way back to the beginning to Genesis 1 to build up your foundation to help you understand where we are now. You would do that using the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at the 1 Year Chronological Bible online.com. It is a free downloadable reading plan. It has nothing to do with me. It's just a reading plan that I chose because I feel like it helps us understand the full reading of the Bible. It helps us understand the big picture of who God is, the God that we follow. So for today, we are with King David. So again, it is day 115 on your calendar. It is April 23rd. Our reading for today is 2 Samuel 7 through 8:14, 1 Chronicles 17 through 18, and Psalm 60. And now if you look at your reading plan, it's broken up into different pieces. And this really helps you to get the picture because it'll have the first section of Second Samuel and then the first section of Chronicles, and they're identical just about. Just a few words are probably different. And then they'll do it again right after that. And this is really to keep you in this chronological order and an understanding of what is happening at the time it's happening. So we are currently reading through the time of King David. So that's where we left off yesterday. Saul obviously has died, and now David is reigning. David is king. He has brought together all the 12 tribes of Israel, and they brought the ark back in towards where it belongs. So they brought it back into, I think it's in Jerusalem at this point, and they are watching over it. They have the Levites back in town watching over it. They have gatekeepers. They have door guards. They have everything that they were supposed to be doing in the past. And so now they are back where they belong in a way. Like I feel like this is sort of the golden age of where they're supposed to be, where the Lord wanted them to be from the very beginning. So we're going to start in 2 Samuel 7. And 2 Samuel 7 and 1 Chronicles 17, again, like I said earlier, they coincide. They run really almost verbatim word for word. So I'm not necessarily going to go to 1 Chronicles. I'm just going to keep us going in this narrative. So verse 1 starts with, after the king was settled in his palace. So remember, they set up the tent and then everyone went back home. So after the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, here I am living in the house of cedar while the ark of God remains in a tent. A couple things I want to note here. One is that the king is back home. And at this stage in the game, because we're going to see war a little bit after that, but at this stage of the game, what we're seeing here is that David has gone to war and now God has given him a time of rest. So chronologically, this could be after some of these other things, right? This is kind of the way with storytelling a little bit, like a narrative. What they want to do is they want to focus on what David's going to say here, right? So now he recognizes he's in a time of rest and he wants to build a house for the Ark of the Covenant. He wants to build a big palace. He says, I'm living in a big place. And so he wants to build God this big place. Why? Because he honors God and he loves the Lord. And so he wants to have him in a place that is recognizable for everyone to see, right? So he's like, I'm in this great place. I want the Lord in this great place. So I want to note that. The second thing that I want to note is it says Nathan the prophet. So we're no longer with Samuel. If you guys remember, Samuel died and we haven't really heard anything about anyone since then. And now out of the blue, this Nathan pops up that we've never met out of nowhere. So Nathan seems to be the predecessor of Samuel. And so he's the one that's the prophet. He's speaking to David and he's speaking through God, right? So he has a relationship with God, prophesying, right? So God is giving him God's word and he's sharing it with David. So at first he says, do what you're going to do, right? He says in verse 3, Nathan replies to the king. He says, whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it. The Lord is with you. So there's this confidence that the Lord is with whatever David has been doing because David is really close to the Lord. But that night, the Lord comes to Nathan and he speaks to him. So, and he tells him, I want you to go and tell this to David. So Nathan the next day is going to come and he's going to tell this to David. And so one of the things he says, wherever I've moved with the Israelites, did I ever say, this is the Lord speaking, Did I ever say to any of the rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar? So God is like, did I ever ask you to build me this house? It was never in my plans at this point. Tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. And so he's reminding David of what I did. I took you out of here. You were just tending sheep, and I brought you out and I made you king. And then in verse 10, it says, and I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home. Sorry, I changed the page. So they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning. And I have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. So is he talking about this time right now? Or is he talking about future times? And these are the kinds of things I'm not 100% sure of. So it looks like there was a time of peace. I don't know if that's the peace he's talking about, or if he's talking about that peace and the long-term peace that we're eventually going to get as people that follow the Lord, right? So right now he's assuring David that he will give them a time of peace. He will give them a time of rest. And it says in verse, right after that verse, so it's in verse 11, the Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I'll raise up your offspring. So he's going to raise up one of his kids, your own flesh and blood, so a real human person, and I'll establish his kingdom. Verse 13, he's the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So David is not going to build his house. This prophecy is assured that one of David's sons will build a house for the Lord. I don't want to go too far in the future, right? So I think I talked about this a little bit yesterday, that I really want to focus on what we see and what has been in the past. So he's saying to him, I'm going to establish this for you. This is what I've already done for you, but for your people, this is my promise. My promise is that some child that you have will have a kingdom established for them forever. A child that you have will build a home for me, right? A kingdom that will endure, and your people Israel will live in peace. So this is a promise that David may or may never see, right? Because right now I know he's alive, I know he's here, and I know that Nathan is talking to him. He may never see this, but what we do know is that his son, one of his offsprings, and I use the term son because if you guys remember in the past, if you guys have been with me before for the past 100 whatever days, they use this term son, father interchangeably, right? Like, so they might say father, but they mean ancestor way back when, right? They might say son, but they might mean multiple generations. I'm making it immature. Multiple generations underneath the father, right? And so we need to be very careful that this could be prophetic just for the son, or this could be prophetic for an ancestor that comes many, 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 many generations away from now. So this, what we do know is we know it's going to be in the line of David, and we know that there's going to be a house that's built, and we know there's going to be a kingdom that endures forever, right? So for all time. So that's, I'll just referring to that in verse 16. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. So there will always be someone in the line of David on God's, be careful about saying God's throne, on the throne sort of that God has given, right? So there will be somebody for that forever. And then Nathan kind of reveals all that to David. All right, so I want to move down into this next section of 2 Samuel 7 and then 1 Chronicles 17. And so David is just humbled in front of the Lord. And this is a posture. I use all these words. I know these are Christian words. David looks at God and he recognizes that God is this immense eternal being. And so I want to use an image because God comes and he deals with David, right? Very specifically with David. And David says, who am I? And we would go, well, you're the king of multiple nations. You're the king over millions and millions of people. So who are you? You're somebody that's pretty important. But in the grand scheme of things, David recognizes that he's nobody. He was a shepherd. He was a nothing and a nobody. And God is establishing this through David forever. And so he's having this personal rapport with David and then developing his family into this kingdom that endures forever. And David is just blown away by it because he recognizes, even though he's king, right, he's still just this blip on the radar. Like, we think of, and maybe you're listening and you don't believe in God, right? So maybe you're listening and you're like, I don't know about this whole thing. As a matter of fact, not only do I not know, but it's completely ridiculous to assume that something created the world, or that something that created the world would have a conversation with us. And yet here we see that he is talking to his people, and he's not human, obviously, and he's not something that's small. If he's so big that he created the world and the universe as we know it, uh, he's something more than we can comprehend. And if you've been with me, you've read the book of Job, you read Genesis, and so there might be a tweak of understanding about the greatness of who this Lord is, right? Because it's not just that it's a God, it's the Lord that established everything. It's the Lord that's eternal, right? Before time began and after time ends, this God will still exist. It's the God who has, from nothing, has created all things, and has established a world that works in unity with each other, right? And in a universe that works in unity with each other, right? So the sun, without the sun, this earth would fall apart. Without the other planets revolving around us, this earth would tip off of its axis and it would fall out of the sky. So this is a universe that kind of all works. It's all interconnected, and we on the earth are all interconnected with it. And this God thought of all of this, created all of this just by saying it. And so he created all this world. And then he comes down and he has a relationship with this itty bitty little human that has a very short time. I think we find out David lived something like 70 years, right? Because I think it said he established his kingdom at around 30. He had the kingdom for 40 years. So he lives till around 70. And so, obviously give or take a little bit of time, but he lives around until around 70. That's nothing. Think of all that has happened in 70 years, right? Like it's a blip of time. And God has a relationship with this one out of bazillions and bazillions of humans that have lived on this earth for this tiny little short period of time in this tiny small little area over this tiny kingdom of people. And that's the one that he decides he's going to establish the kingdom with forever. Like, it's just, when you think about it. And so, and David doesn't even know what he's going to establish. He just knows that he has a relationship with this God. And so he is humbled by it. And because of the promise, he believes the promise. He trusts that the Lord has done so much for him already that he already believes the promise. And so he just worships him. And he says, you have done great things and made it known to your servant. Verse 22, how great are you, sovereign, right? In charge of everything. Sovereign Lord, there's no one like you, no God but you, as we have heard with our own ears. And then who are we, Israel? One nation on earth, right? You came and you redeemed us. So we're nothing without you. Verse 25, and now, Lord God, keep forever the promise you have made concerning your servant and his house. Do as you promised. Not that he doesn't trust that God's going to do as he's promised, but he's making this connection between the two of them, right? So do as you promised. David needs to do as he's promised, and he's reaching out to the Lord kind of in trust and in faith. Verse 28, sovereign Lord, you are God. Your covenant is trustworthy, and you have promised these good things to your servant. How does he know the covenant is trustworthy? Because he has lived in a time where he is fully and completely dependent on God. And God every time comes through with exactly what he says he's going to come through with, all of his promises. And then we repeat this same thing in 1 Chronicles 17. So when I move on to 2 Samuel 8, 1 through 14, and now he's talking about all these wars that he's been in. So in verse 1, it says, in the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And he took Method-Ammah from control of the Philistines. And then he defeats the Moabites. And then he defeats Hadazer of Rahab. And then someone comes, the Arameans come and they try and save him, and he defeats them. So just over and over again, we see all these different practices. Like, so at one point, he has all these guys spread out on the ground, and he kills 2 out of 3 of them, right? Another point, he hamstrings all the chariots. At another point, he kills 18 to 20,000 men, right? So he's in very big ways God is leading his army and he's subduing all these people. And then once he subdues them, right? So here we go with something that was a little bit different from what Joshua did. Once he subdues them, he puts garrisons in. And so he puts in the Israelite people to maintain and establish control over those that are left. So there are still some people left. But David is keeping control over all of these areas. So he's really, truly king of this entire area. And again, this is all to God. God gave him all of these victories. So it says, then he, with all the money that he had, all the gold and the silver and the bronze, and I mean, I use the term money, but gold, silver, and bronze. In verse 11, it says, King David dedicated these articles to the Lord as he had done with the silver and gold from all the nations he had subdued. So he gets these shields and he dedicates them to the Lord. He gets gold plunder and he dedicates that to the Lord. So he is recognizing and honoring that the Lord did all of these things for him. In verse 12 in the Chronicles section, it says, Abishai, son of Zeruiah, struck down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. And then David, so we see even a little bit extra, so it's not just David leading and doing everything. Abishai came out and he did some of it as well. And then we move right on to this psalm. And so this, I assume, is in the time of war. So my notes say when it is, but because of the psalm itself, I'm assuming it's in all of these times of war, right? So he's leaning and heavily depending on the Lord in all things, right? And so I would say that this psalm is in that way, speaking of how heavy he leans on him. So in the very beginning, he's talking about, he says, you've rejected us, God, and burst upon us, which seems like it starts really bad. You've been angry. Now restore us. The way where he is now, it has not always been this way. So if you've been in the past with me, you know all these trials and tribulations that the Israelites have gone through. The Israelites have consistently turned from the Lord, and the Lord has struck them down by lifting other nations up, right? And so we know that the Lord has been angry. He's rejected them. But now they're coming together, and David is like, restore us, lift us back up to where you want us to be. He said, you've shown your people desperate times. You've given us wine that makes us stagger. But for those who fear you, you've raised a banner. So always this recognition that God is first, right? You've raised a banner for us. You've shown us that you're leading the way. And then he said, save us. And then he kind of talks about all these groups of people. And I just want to go into verse 7, where he says, Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim is my helmet. Right? This is God, because it says God spoke from a sanctuary. Ephraim is my helmet. Judah is my scepter. So right now what we do know is that David is from the tribe of Judah, and David is leading the people. He's the king, right? So Judah is the scepter. And remember what he also says. This kingdom will be established through David forever. So Judah will always remain the scepter. So right now we see that Judah is a scepter because of David, and it wasn't that way, right? Benjamin was the scepter for a little while. So Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. But now we know that Judah is the scepter. Judah is the one that is leading. That's the tribe that David has come from. All right, so we're going to see how that continues in the future. But all right, and then of course he's talking about his enemies, and then we finish up in verses 9 through 12. Who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? Is it not you, God? So God holds power over everything. God is the one that's going to lead them in. Give us aid against the enemy, for human help is worthless. So all of us who think, if we just do this, if we just do that, if I just add another 100 people to my military, if I just, even going down to like myself, if I just say this the right way, if I just do it in this way, then everything will be fixed. And if I'm not going to God and asking God for that, human help is worth nothing. It doesn't matter what I do, right? There's nothing worthy of what I do without God. So my just trying to come and do things on my own, in my own steam and in my own way is worthless. Verse 12, finishing up with this, with God, we will gain the victory and he will trample down our enemies. So with God, anything is possible. As long as it comes, obviously, as long as it comes under his will. But right now, David is working towards the kingdom that God wanted. And so God is establishing this kingdom under David, and he will continue to do this forever. That's where we're ending today. And I want you to, if you liked it, if this was a blessing for you, I want you to like it. I want you to hit the like button, share this with other people, subscribe to the channel. Keep reading your Bible. Don't just come and listen to me. My thoughts are my thoughts, and I'm in prayer about it, and I let the Lord lead me in these things. But I also have a perspective, and I am also human, and it says human help is worthless. So do this with the Lord first. So be in prayer, be in your Bible. That is how you establish your connection with God, and knowing who He is. So I want you guys to keep reading and meet with me again tomorrow.